The winter of 1843 struck the upper Mississippi Valley with a cold so severe, settlers recorded temperatures 30 degrees below what their almanacs predicted.
In a single-room cabin near Fort Snelling, Minnesota, a family woke to find frost coating the inside walls. The fire had burned low overnight. Outside, the thermometer read 42 degrees below 0 Fahrenheit. The father rose in darkness, pulled back a layer of ash from the hearth, and found what he needed. Embers still glowing red beneath the gray powder. He fed them kindling, built the flame back up, and averted disaster. One failed firebank, one morning without hot coals to restart the blaze, and the family could freeze before help arrived. This was not rare. It was a routine. Across the American frontier, from the plains of the Dakotas to the forests of the upper Midwest, settlers faced winters where survival depended on architectural precision, relentless labor, and the willingness to borrow knowledge from others. The log cabin, often romanticized as a symbol of rugged independence, was in reality a sophisticated thermal machine. Its walls were not simple stacks of timber, but carefully engineered barriers against wind, cold, and death. The men and women who built these structures did not invent them. They inherited techniques refined over 5,000 years, carried across the Atlantic by immigrants who had survived similar winters in Scandinavia and northern Russia. The question was not whether the log cabin could work in North America. It was whether the settlers could execute it well enough
to live through the night. The log cabin arrived in North America in 1638,
brought by Swedish and Finnish settlers along the Delaware River. These immigrants came from regions where winter temperatures regularly plunged below freezing,
where timber was abundant, and where survival depended on speed and thermal efficiency. They brought with them a building method that had been tested for millennia.
Archaeological evidence suggests log construction originated in the Bronze Age, around 3500 BC, in the forests of Scandinavia and northern Russia. By the time it reached the American frontier, it was not an experiment.
It was proven technology. The advantage was speed.
A skilled team of Finnish or Swedish builders could raise a cabin in a single day using only axes. No nails, no complex joinery, just interlocking logs, notched at the corners to lock into place. This speed mattered in a landscape where winter could arrive suddenly, and shelter meant survival. The technique spread rapidly across the frontier, not because it was novel, but because it worked. The settlers who lacked this inherited knowledge, those who tried to improvise or adapt methods from warmer climates, often did not survive their first winter. But raising the walls was only the first step. A stack of logs, even carefully notched, left gaps. Wind slipped through, snow drifted in, vermin found entry. The structure had to be sealed, and this sealing process revealed the true engineering sophistication of the frontier cabin.
Settlers used two materials, chinking and daubing. Chinking was the filler.
Wood shims, stones, or oakum packed into the larger gaps between logs. Daubing was the plaster that covered the chinking, creating a smooth, airtight seal on the exterior. Daubing was not just any random mud.
It was a biocomposite material, engineered through trial and error to meet specific demands.
The base was clay mixed with sand, sometimes with lime added for hardness. But clay alone cracked.
Temperature swings caused the logs to expand and contract. The daubing had to flex without breaking.
Settlers added binders, which included straw, moss, and animal hair, to give the mixture tensile strength. And they added fat. Animal fat, lard, or tallow rendered from butchered livestock made the daubing hydrophobic.
It repelled water, prevented ice buildup, and kept the seal intact through freeze-thaw cycles.
This was material science without laboratories, chemistry without formal training. The settlers who got it right survived. Those who didn't spent their winters fighting drafts and losing heat. Windows posed another problem. Glass was scarce and expensive, so settlers improvised. They stretched paper across window frames and rubbed it with animal fat until it became translucent and waterproof.
Some used animal bladders, scraped thin and dried. The result was dim light and minimal heat loss. Comfort mattered less than thermal retention. But the logs themselves provided passive insulation. Hardwoods like oak and chestnut were common in the eastern and Midwestern regions.
In the northern forests, settlers preferred white cedar, fir, or pine because these species resisted rot and were easier to work with. The density of these logs slowed the transfer of heat from inside to outside.
A well-chinked, well-daubed cabin could maintain an interior temperature significantly warmer than the exterior,
even when the fire burned low. Meanwhile, maintaining that fire was a ritual. Wood collection was an exhausting and dangerous work.
Settlers had to venture into frozen forests, fell trees, haul them back, and split them into usable pieces. The labor cost was immense. Ignition was equally difficult. Flint and steel could start a fire, but in the cold, with numb fingers and damp tinder, the process could take minutes or longer.
A family could not afford to let the fire die completely. So every night before bedtime,
the father or eldest child performed the fire bank, which involved raking the embers into a tight pile,
and then covering them with a thick layer of ash. The ash acted as insulation,
slowing the flow of oxygen and trapping heat. By morning, the embers were still hot. Kindling caught quickly, the cabin warmed, and the family survived. However, in cases where fire banks failed, ash kicked aside and logs burned too quickly, embers died. When this happened, the family faced a life-threatening emergency. The only solution was to borrow fire from a neighbor. A child or adult would dress in layers, walk through the cold, sometimes for miles, and return with a tin pail of hot coals. This act shattered the myth of the rugged individualist.
Survival on the frontier demanded cooperation. A failed fire bank meant dependence on someone else. However, some settlers engineered a more permanent solution. German immigrants in the Midwest built house barns,
structures that placed livestock quarters directly adjacent to or beneath the human living space. The logic was metabolic. A cow, a horse, or a pig constantly generates heat. By integrating animals into the thermal envelope of the home,
settlers reduced the labor required to collect and burn wood. The animals became passive heaters.
The warmth was reliable and required no additional fuel. 20th century agricultural engineers would later formalize this principle, recommending that barns for dairy cows be no wider than 34 feet to maximize the distribution of animal-generated heat,
without the need for supplemental heating. Hay and straw stored in the loft above,
trapping warmth below. But proximity to animals came with costs. Cholera, tuberculosis, and other diseases spread more easily when humans and livestock share enclosed spaces. Settlers understood this risk, but they accepted it.
In the depths of a 40-below winter, staying alive through the night took precedence over concerns about long-term sanitation.
But that was not all. The fireplace itself was a thermal mass device. Settlers built hearths and chimneys from local stone or clay.
These materials absorbed heat while the fire burned, and radiated it back into the cabin after the flames died down. The design required balance. The chimney needed enough draft to vent smoke safely.
But too much draft would pull warm air out of the cabin and replace it with cold air from outside.
The best fireplaces achieved equilibrium, enough airflow to prevent smoke buildup, but not so much that the cabin lost heat faster than the fire could produce it.
This was engineering by iteration. Families adjusted, rebuilt, and refined until they found the design that worked.
Surviving the cold was only half the challenge. Isolation meant that settlers had to preserve enough food
in summer and autumn to last through the months when resupply was impossible. A failed harvest or a botched preservation effort meant starvation before spring.
Settlers built specialized infrastructure to manage this risk. The root cellar was not a hole in the ground.
It was an engineered microclimate. The goal was to maintain a stable temperature between 35 and 40 degrees Fahrenheit,
and a humidity level between 90 and 95%. This range prevented both spoilage from warmth and desiccation from dryness. Settlers achieved this through careful design. They dug the cellar underground, using the earth itself as insulation. The ground temperature below the frost line remained relatively constant year-round.